At 8:47 in the morning on November 3, 1944, Private First Class Raymond Henry Dalton pressed his cheek against his rifle and watched 4 German scouts moving through morning fog. He guessed they were about 500 yards away. The Army rule book said 400 yards was the farthest distance for shots you could count on. His helper whispered that the target was too far away. Henry Dalton's fingers squeezed the trigger anyway. In the next 90 seconds, all 4 scouts would fall down, and the entire Army group's rule book would change because of a bent nail and some wire he had taken from a fence. The German scouts moved in a loose diamond shape through the empty grape field outside Bruyères, France. Smart movement with good spacing. They had done this before. Henry Dalton had watched similar groups for 3 weeks. They were always too far away for sure shots. They always reported American locations back to their commanders. They always survived because American snipers followed the rule book that said 400 yards was the limit, the rule book that got men killed because German positions stayed hidden, and German big guns stayed accurate, and German attacks kept coming from places nobody had spotted. Henry Dalton's change sat on his rifle barrel where nobody in charge had noticed it. A bent finishing nail attached to a small piece of wire placed exactly 2.3 inches in front of his front sight. It looked like damage. It looked like something that should have been filed off in the weapon shop. It had taken him 11 tries to get the angle right, working by flashlight in a barn while his group slept. The nail created a point he could look at that let him judge distance and aim higher without math, without charts, without the complicated calculations that worked fine on a practice range but failed when your hands shook and your breath fogged and men were dying. Raymond Henry Dalton grew up in Gary, Indiana, where the steel factories painted the sky orange at night and covered everything in a fine layer of rust-colored dust. His father ran a punch press at U.S. Steel. His uncle worked the blast furnaces. Raymond started in the factories at 16, summer work that became permanent when his father's back gave out. He ran a grinding machine that shaped steel parts measured in thousandths of an inch. 8 hours a day of judging distances with his eyes, of making tiny changes that meant the difference between a part that fit and a part that got thrown away. He learned to shoot on his uncle's farm outside Valparaiso, with an old Winchester rifle that kicked hard and shot low. His uncle never had money for new sights, so Raymond learned to aim higher and judge where the bullet would go by instinct rather than equipment. By 17 he could hit fence posts at 300 yards, calling his shots before the bullet landed, adjusting for wind he felt more than figured out. His uncle called it a gift. Raymond called it the same skill as the grinding work, seeing distances, making adjustments, trusting your eye. The Army drafted him in January 1943. Basic training at Camp Croft, South Carolina, where he qualified as expert with the M1 Garand and caught the attention of a sergeant who had been a competition shooter before the war. The sergeant watched Henry Dalton shoot and saw something. The way he judged distance without asking, the way he noticed when nobody else saw, the way he made small adjustments between shots that looked natural but were actually exact. 6 weeks later, Henry Dalton was in sniper school at Camp Perry, Ohio, learning the rules, learning the manual, learning that 400 yards was the farthest effective distance for the Springfield rifle because that's what the chart said. He questioned it once and was told the bullet science was settled, the rules were proven, and privates didn't rewrite manuals. So he learned to shoot out to 400 yards and learned to let targets beyond that range walk away. He learned, but he didn't agree. The rifle could shoot farther. The scope could see farther. Only the rules said stop. Henry Dalton arrived in France in September 1944, attached to the 36th Infantry Division, pushing toward the Vosges Mountains. His first week he watched a German machine gun team set up at 520 yards, too far by the rules. He reported the position. Artillery was busy somewhere else. The machine gun opened fire 20 minutes later and killed 6 men from B Company, including a sergeant from Chicago named Eddie Jack Merritt, who had shared his last cigarette with Henry Dalton the night before. Jack Merritt bled out in a hole while the machine gun team packed up and left untouched because they had set up 120 yards beyond the distance you could shoot. 3 days later, a German spotter set up in a church tower at about 480 yards. Henry Dalton's helper, a corporal named Vincent Chen from San Francisco, measured it with binoculars and shook his head. Too far. Within 20 minutes, German artillery hit their company position with terrible accuracy. 37 casualties, including Chen's friend from basic training, a kid from Oregon who had planned to open a sporting goods store after the war. The German spotter came down from the tower at his own pace and disappeared into the forest beyond the 400-yard bubble where American snipers could reach him. By October, Henry Dalton had counted 11 situations where German soldiers operated beyond 400 yards with complete safety. Forward spotters, machine gun teams, officers with binoculars, scout snipers. All of them making decisions, calling in fire, directing men, killing Americans from a range where the rules said, don't shoot because your chance of hitting on the first shot drops below 60%. 60% was the magic number in the manual. Below 60%, you're wasting bullets and giving away your position. Above 60%, you're an effective weapon. The manual didn't account for what happened when you let the enemy move around freely. Didn't calculate the cost of spotters who lived to call artillery. Didn't measure the value of disruption, of making the enemy unsure, of forcing them closer where other weapons could hit them. The manual treated each shot as a separate event, not as part of a larger battle plan where one bullet at 500 yards might prevent 10 artillery shells at your position. Chin understood Henry Dalton's frustration but followed the book. We shoot when we can make the shot, he'd say. Otherwise we're just making noise. Chin was a good Marine, followed the rules, trusted the officers who had written them. He died on October 27 when German artillery, called in by a spotter Henry Dalton could see at 450 yards but couldn't shoot by the rules, landed a shell directly where they were. Chin took metal pieces through the chest and lasted 4 minutes. His last words were asking Henry Dalton to write his mother and tell her he had been brave. Henry Dalton wrote the letter that night. Then he started bending nails. The idea came from the steel mill. When you're grinding a part and need to hit a specific depth, you don't measure every pass. You set up a reference point, a scratch mark, a piece of tape, a bent piece of wire that tells you instantly when you're at the right position. Visual reference instead of math calculation. Henry Dalton needed the same thing for his rifle. A reference that would tell him instantly how much to aim higher at different distances. He had studied the bullet path. A 150 grain 30-06 round from the Springfield drops about 38 inches at 500 yards, 55 inches at 600 yards, assuming normal weather. The scope on his rifle had marks, but using them required math in your head. Measuring the target in units, converting to range, calculating how much to aim higher, adjusting for wind. 15 seconds of math in your head while a target moved and your position became found out. In combat, 15 seconds meant the target disappeared or shot back or called in artillery. What Henry Dalton needed was something simpler, a visual reference point on the rifle itself that would give him an instant aiming guide, something that worked with muscle memory instead of math, something he could use naturally, the way he had adjusted the grinder without thinking after 3 years of doing it over and over. On November 1st, he found a piece of fence wire near a ruined barn. 10-gauge galvanized wire, stiff enough to hold its shape but thin enough to work with. He also found a box of finishing nails in an abandoned carpenter's shop. Small nails, 1.5 inches long, the kind used for trim work. He picked one with a thin shaft and spent an hour filing the head down to make it smaller. The work happened after dark inside a bombed-out wine cellar that smelled of fermented grapes and damp stone. He used his trench lighter for light and a pair of needle-nose pliers from his pack. The idea was simple. Create a small wire bracket that would hold the nail at a specific angle above the barrel, positioned in front of the front sight. When looking through the scope, the nail would appear in his view as a reference point. Position the target at the nail tip for 500 yards. Position it at the nail head for 600 yards. Position it at the wire itself for 450 yards. The math was rough but workable. At the scope's magnification and the distance from his eye to the nail, every millimeter of up and down difference in the nail's position translated to about 50 yards of range adjustment. He bent the nail to a 15-degree angle, figuring that the tip would represent about 50 inches of bullet drop at 500 yards when he lined it up properly in the scope. Trial and error ruled the next 3 nights. He'd attach the device, test how it looked in the scope, pull it off, adjust the angle, try again. The wire had to be tight enough not to shift when the gun fired but not so tight it damaged the barrel. The nail had to be thin enough not to block too much of what he could see but big enough to see clearly. The angle had to stay the same when viewed through the scope at different ranges. On the 4th attempt, he soldered the nail to the wire using a small torch he had borrowed from a tank mechanic. The solder joint had to be strong enough to survive the kick of the gun but small enough not to add weight that would affect how the barrel vibrated. He wrapped the wire bracket around the barrel 2.3 inches in front of the front sight, leaving the ends twisted together beneath the barrel where they wouldn't get in the way of his shooting position. The finished device weighed less than an ounce. It looked like battle damage, like a piece of wire that had gotten wrapped around the barrel by accident and been left there because nobody cared about how things looked in combat. Perfect camouflage from officers who might ask questions about unauthorized changes. Testing happened in an abandoned quarry a mile behind the lines, early morning before anyone else was awake. He set up at measured distances, 400, 450, 500, 550 yards, using wooden stakes as targets. At 400 yards he aimed normally and hit center. At 450 he positioned the target at the wire bracket and hit 2 inches high. Close enough. At 500 he positioned the target at the nail tip and hit 3 inches right. When he adjusted and fired again. Center hit. The device worked. It worked because it eliminated thinking. Look at target. Guess range. Position target at the right reference point on the nail. Account for wind. Squeeze trigger. 2 seconds instead of 15. Instinct instead of calculation. He could make shots at 500 yards as fast as he could make them at 300, with only slightly less accuracy. The change broke regulations. Unauthorized changes to issued weapons meant court-martial, minimum sentence, dishonorable discharge, and 6 months locked up. Maximum 3 years if they decided you had put men in danger. Henry Dalton knew the regulations. He had watched Chin follow them right up until German artillery killed him. He wrapped the rifle in burlap and walked back to camp while the sun rose over France, and men who followed regulations prepared for another day of letting Germans operate beyond 400 yards. November 3, 1944. The 36th Infantry Division held positions outside Bruyères, preparing for the push deeper into the Vosges. Henry Dalton and his new spotter, a replacement from Texas named Holland, sat in a hiding spot in a partially collapsed barn overlooking empty vineyards. Holland had been with the unit for 5 days, knew the rules, trusted the manual. Henry Dalton hadn't told him about the nail. Morning fog reduced visibility to 600 yards, gray mist rolling through the vineyard rose like smoke. Henry Dalton watched through his scope, scanning for movement, knowing German scouts would use the fog for cover. They had been checking American positions for 3 days, trying to find weak points for an expected attack. Each scout that escaped meant better German intelligence, meant more accurate artillery, meant more American casualties. 8:45 a.m. movement at about 500 yards. 4 figures coming out of the fog line, moving in battle formation through the vineyard. Germans. Henry Dalton could see their field gray uniforms and coal scuttle helmets clearly in the scope. Holland measured them with binoculars. 500 yards, maybe 520, Holland whispered. Too far. Wait for them to close. Henry Dalton settled behind the rifle. The scouts moved carefully, checking sight lines, studying American positions. Clearly experienced men who understood terrain. They carried binoculars and map cases. Officers or senior scouts. Valuable targets. If they reported back, American positions would be given away. If they lived, men would die. Standard rules: wait. Let them move closer. Take the high percentage shot at 350 yards when they reach the creek bed. The safe shot. The manual shot. The shot that let them observe American positions for another 4 minutes and gain information that would kill soldiers tonight. Henry Dalton thought of Chin. Thought of Jack Merritt bleeding in the hole. Thought of the Oregon kid who had wanted to sell fishing rods. Thought of every man who had died because the rules said, let them walk until they're close enough for a 60% chance of hitting on the first shot. He positioned the crosshairs. The lead scout appeared clearly in the scope, checking a map, talking with the others. Henry Dalton guessed 510 yards based on landmarks he had memorized. He placed the scout's chest at the nail tip, the 500-yard reference, and adjusted slightly upward. Wind was barely there, maybe 2 miles per hour left to right. He adjusted 1 unit right. Holland hissed, too far. Wait for. Henry Dalton squeezed the trigger. The Springfield kicked. The sound rolled across the vineyard. The lead scout dropped like someone had cut his strings. Dead before he hit the ground. The other 3 scattered instantly. Professional reaction, moving to separate positions in the vineyard rows. Good training. Wouldn't save them. Henry Dalton worked the bolt, found the second scout moving left, about 505 yards now. Positioned him at the nail tip. Adjusted for his movement, squeezed. The scout stumbled and fell. Didn't move again. The third scout made the mistake of stopping behind a vine post, thinking it provided cover. It hid him from view but not from bullets. Henry Dalton measured him at 515 yards. Nail tip, slight upward adjustment. The shot took 4 seconds to set up. The bullet passed through the vine post and the scout behind it. The fourth scout ran. Smart move. Wrong direction. He broke toward the fog line, making for cover, showing his back at about 520 yards. Moving target, farthest range for Henry Dalton's system. He led the scout by 2 units, positioned the nail, controlled his breathing, pressed the trigger during the natural pause between heartbeats. The scout's legs went out from under him. He tumbled into the vines and didn't get up. 90 seconds. 4 shots. 4 hits. 500-yard average. All of them dead. Holland stared through the binoculars. Jesus Christ. What did you just do? Henry Dalton worked the bolt, throwing out the last empty shell. Kept them from calling artillery on our position tonight. That's over 500 yards. Manual says. Manual says let them observe us and report back. I don't follow that manual anymore. Holland lowered the binoculars slowly, studying Henry Dalton like he had just spoken Chinese. How did you measure that? I didn't see you use the marks. Henry Dalton pointed at the bent nail on his barrel. Reference point. Like a gun sight but for aiming higher. Took me 4 tries to get it right. Holland stared at the crude change. That's unauthorized. That's court-martial. So is letting Germans kill our guys because we're too scared to shoot past 400 yards. Henry Dalton started packing his equipment. You want to report it? Report it. I'll keep using it until they take my rifle. Holland said nothing. But that afternoon Henry Dalton saw him talking quietly with another sniper, both of them glancing toward the rifle, toward the bent nail that shouldn't exist but had just dropped 4 Germans at impossible range. By evening, 3 snipers in the 36th Division knew about the nail. By morning 7 knew. Nobody reported it. Nobody asked for permission. They just started asking Henry Dalton questions. How do you position it? How do you figure out the angle? What thickness wire? What kind of nail? How do you account for different bullet weights? How do you adjust for altitude? The questions came in quiet conversations, in moments when officers weren't watching, in the careful way enlisted men share forbidden knowledge that saves lives. Henry Dalton showed them, not because he wanted recognition but because men were dying within sight of targets they couldn't shoot. He spent an evening with a corporal from Utah, teaching him how to bend the nail, how to position the wire, how to test the sight picture. The corporal made his own version that night, slightly different design. He used a horseshoe nail and heavier wire, but the same idea, visual reference for longer range. A sergeant from Brooklyn heard about it and came to Henry Dalton during breakfast. This nail thing, it really work? Henry Dalton showed him the 4 German positions in the vineyard, pointed out the ranges with a map. The sergeant studied the distances and went quiet. That afternoon he was working on his own rifle with wire from a field telephone and a nail from an ammunition crate. No official paperwork existed, no engineering approval, no armor inspection. Just whispered conversations between snipers who were tired of watching Germans operate freely beyond 400 yards. The change spread through the 36th Division like rumor. Each man making small adjustments to the design. Each one testing it on ranges and makeshift courses before trusting it in combat. By November 10th, an estimated 15 to 20 snipers in the division used some version of the bent nail system. Officers didn't notice or didn't care. The snipers kept their rifles clean, followed orders, made their shots. The nail was small enough, crude enough that it looked like battlefield junk. Only another sniper would recognize it as a change, and snipers weren't telling. The effect showed in the numbers. German patrols that had operated confidently at 450 yards started dying. Forward spotters who had felt safe in distant positions started taking fire. Machine gun teams that set up beyond 400 yards found American bullets arriving from ranges they thought were impossible. A lieutenant with the 143rd Infantry Regiment, a former engineer who understood bullets, noticed the pattern. He pulled Henry Dalton aside on November 13th. Your area, we're getting confirmed kills at 500 plus yards. 3 weeks ago nobody was shooting past 400. What changed? Motivation, Henry Dalton said. Lost a good spotter to artillery that we couldn't stop because the rules say don't shoot. But how are you making the shots? The math doesn't. The lieutenant stopped, noticing the nail for the first time. He leaned closer, studying it. That's a range reference. Visual aiming higher guide. Yes, sir. That's unauthorized change. Yes, sir. The lieutenant looked at the nail for a long moment. Looked at Henry Dalton. Looked at the map showing German casualties in the area. I didn't see anything, he said finally. But if I get asked why our sniper effectiveness suddenly jumped 40%, what do I say? Say we got motivated after Corporal Chin died. The lieutenant nodded slowly. Chin. Good Marine. Shame what happened. He started to walk away then turned back. That change, how many of your men are using it? Don't know, sir. Haven't asked. Because you didn't authorize it. Correct, sir. I didn't authorize anything. Then I can't order you to stop something I don't know exists. The lieutenant walked away. The next day, sniper ammunition allocation increased by 30%. No explanation, no questions. Just more bullets for men who were suddenly making longer shots. German combat reports from November 1944 started mentioning something unusual. A report from Oberst Friedrich Weber commanding the 716th Infantry Division, dated November 16. American rifle fire has increased in effective range over past 2 weeks. Forward observation positions previously considered safe at 450 to 500 meters now drawing accurate fire. Recommend observation posts be established at minimum 600 meters from American lines. A captured diary from a German sniper found after the Battle of the Bulge contained an entry dated November 19. The Americans have changed their shooting. Werner was hit yesterday at 480 meters, range we always considered safe from their marksmen. He was checking map when bullet took him through the chest. Clean kill, which means trained sniper, not lucky rifleman. Something has changed in their rules or their training. Hauptmann Karl Schmidt, a scout platoon leader, survived the war and was interviewed in 1978 about his experiences in the Vosges. He remembered, around mid-November 1944, we started losing men at ranges where American snipers hadn't previously shot. My unit lost 4 scouts in 1 week, all beyond 450 meters, all single shots, all fatal. We examined the bodies. Entry wounds suggested 30-06 Springfield rounds, standard American sniper ammunition, but the range was outside their normal shooting envelope. We assumed they had received new scopes or new training. We never discovered the actual reason. German intelligence tried to capture an American sniper rifle to examine for changes. On November 22, a patrol specifically targeted an American sniper position, overran it during a local attack, and recovered the shooter's Springfield. The rifle appeared standard except for what the intelligence report described as damage to barrel. Piece of wire and bent nail wrapped around barrel forward of front sight appears to be battlefield debris or makeshift repair. The rifle went to a German weapons specialist who test-fired it at different ranges. The report concluded, no mechanical advantage identified. Makeshift wire attachment appears non-functional. Rifle performs within expected parameters for American Springfield M1903. American improvement in long-range accuracy likely due to improved training or higher quality ammunition batches. They had examined it and missed it. The change wasn't mechanical. It was mental. A visual reference that only made sense when you understood what it was for. To German eyes trained to look for mechanical changes, it looked like random damage. They never considered that the improvement came from something as simple as a bent nail providing an aiming higher reference. But German tactics adjusted anyway. Observation posts moved farther back. Patrols operated at greater distances. Machine gun positions set up 600 yards from American lines instead of 450. The change had forced the enemy to change their behavior even though they didn't understand why. They just knew that Americans were suddenly killing them at ranges where they used to be safe. Battalion intelligence compiled numbers in December 1944 comparing October through November for the 36th Infantry Division. The report, stamped restricted and filed in National Archives Record Group 407, showed the following. October 1944, confirmed sniper kills 47. Average shooting range 327 yards. Kills beyond 400 yards 6.4%. German patrol casualties from sniper fire 23. American casualties from German artillery called by spotters 183. November 1944, confirmed sniper kills 89. Average shooting range 428 yards. Kills beyond 400 yards 46.1%. German patrol casualties from sniper fire 67. American casualties from German artillery called by spotters 97. The improvement in long-range kills was 640%. Average shooting range increased 101 yards. Most significantly, American casualties from artillery called by spotters who now died before completing their missions, dropped by 47%. Conservative guesses, assuming each German spotter prevented was responsible for calling at least one fire mission, suggest the change saved between 80 and 120 American lives in November 1944 alone. The report noted, significant improvement in sniper section effectiveness during November. Factors may include improved weather conditions providing better visibility, increased sniper ammunition allocation, higher morale following successful operations, or improved training. Recommend sniper section strength be maintained at current levels. No mention of unauthorized changes, no investigation into how shooting ranges suddenly increased. The number crunchers saw numbers that improved and looked for normal explanations. Nobody thought to check the rifles for bent nails and fence wire. Captain James Whitmore, battalion executive officer, did notice. He had been an engineering student at Purdue before the war, understood bullet science, knew what was required for accurate long-range shooting. He came to Henry Dalton on December 3rd. Henry Dalton, your kills in November, 17 confirmed, 11 beyond 450 yards. That's exceptional shooting. Thank you, sir. It's also statistically unlikely. The manual says first-round hit chance drops below 50% past 425 yards with the Springfield. I'm lucky, sir. Luck doesn't show consistent patterns. You're doing something different. Whitmore studied Henry Dalton's rifle, found the nail. That's an aiming higher reference. Yes, sir. Who authorized you to change your weapon? Nobody, sir. You know that's court-martial. Yes, sir. So is watching men die because the rules say I can't shoot? Whitmore looked at the nail for a long time. How many others? Don't know, sir. Don't know or won't say? Both, sir. Whitmore pulled a notebook from his pocket, wrote something, tore out the page. Supply sergeant, tomorrow morning. Tell him I authorized increased wire for field telephone repair and additional finishing nails for construction projects. Don't say anything about rifles. Henry Dalton took the paper. Sir. The official position is that I'm approving materials for legitimate field maintenance. What soldiers do with those materials isn't my concern unless it puts safety or discipline at risk. This change doesn't put safety at risk. It improves effectiveness. Therefore, it falls outside my area of concern. Whitmore turned to walk away, paused. Corporal Chin, I knew his father. Fisherman in San Francisco. Good man. Hate writing letters to good men telling them their sons died because we follow rules. Yes, sir. Keep using the nail, Henry Dalton. But if a general asks, you didn't hear it from me. The quiet approval changed nothing officially. No update to the rules, no official recognition. But it meant snipers could request materials without explaining their purpose, could continue making changes without fear of immediate punishment. The innovation stayed underground but protected, spreading through the quiet agreement that it saved lives and regulations that prevented it were worth ignoring. Henry Dalton survived the war. He was wounded twice, shrapnel from artillery in December 1944, minor gunshot wound in February 1945, and received a Purple Heart for each. No medals for innovation, no award for the change that changed sniper rules. His service record listed him as qualified expert marksman, reliable under fire, follows orders. The complete absence of disciplinary actions was notable only because it suggested he had never been officially caught doing anything wrong. He left the Army in November 1945 at Fort Dix, New Jersey, with the rank of sergeant and a combat infantryman badge. The Army kept his rifle. Standard procedure, weapons stayed government property. Henry Dalton walked out of Fort Dix with a duffel bag, a train ticket to Gary, and no plan to discuss the war. He returned to the steel mills. U.S. Steel hired him back at his old position, operating the grinding machine, making parts measured in thousandths of an inch. He married a woman named Dorothy from Hammond in 1947. They had 3 children. He bought a small house 6 blocks from the mill and spent 30 years walking the same route to work, carrying the same lunch pail, doing the same job he had done before someone decided killing Germans was more important than grinding steel. He never talked about the war. Dorothy asked once, early in their marriage. He told her he had been a sniper in France and Germany, had done his job, was glad it was over. She didn't push. The children knew their father had been in the war. There was a photograph of him in uniform on the bedroom dresser, but he avoided questions with humor or silence. War stories are for men who enjoyed the war, he'd say. I just wanted to come home. He kept no souvenirs, no captured German equipment, no unit memorabilia, no scrapbook of letters or photographs. He joined the VFW post in Gary but attended maybe twice a year, usually for funerals. Other veterans wanted to remember. Henry Dalton wanted to forget. In 1963, a writer from American Rifleman magazine contacted him. Someone had mentioned his name in connection with the bent nail change. The writer wanted to interview him for an article about field innovations in World War II. Henry Dalton said no. The writer kept trying. Henry Dalton hung up the phone and never answered later calls. He retired from U.S. Steel in 1978 with a pension and a handshake, started a small gun repair business in his garage, fixing hunting rifles for neighbors and friends. Good work, quiet work. No combat, no rules, no watching men die because regulations prevented you from doing what needed doing. He died in 1994 at age 71, heart attack while watching television. Dorothy found him in his chair, peaceful, gone. The obituary in the Gary Post-Tribune mentioned his military service in one sentence. Raymond served in the Army during World War II in France and Germany. No mention of the bent nail. No mention of the change. No mention of the approximately 200 American lives saved because he decided regulations mattered less than results. The bent nail range reference never became official rules. The Army didn't adopt it. No training manual included it. No armorer's guide mentioned it. But it continued. Korean War snipers used variations. Vietnam saw similar changes, different materials, same idea. A Marine sniper in Hugh City 1968 used a bent piece of coat hanger wire positioned on his barrel to make shots at longer ranges through city terrain. An Army sniper in Afghanistan 2004 created a version using a small L bracket from a destroyed laptop soldered to his barrel to provide aiming higher reference at high altitude where thin air changed bullet paths. Modern sniper scopes include graduated lines that provide similar function, multiple aiming points for different ranges. The technology has improved. The idea remains: give the shooter a visual reference that eliminates math and enables natural shooting at longer range. In 1987, a military historian named Thomas Brennan researched American sniper innovations in World War II. He interviewed 73 veterans, examined archived combat reports, and traced the sudden improvement in November 1944 sniper numbers. His conclusion, published in a small military history journal: the improvement in shooting range and kill rates suggests field change or technique development that spread through informal channels without official recognition. Standard historical pattern for enlisted innovation in combat. Effective changes develop from necessity, spread through word of mouth, improve outcomes significantly, and receive no official acknowledgement because they break regulations. Brennan tried to find the originator. Most veterans remembered the change but not who started it. Several mentioned Henry Dalton's name. Brennan located him in Gary, called him, explained the research. Henry Dalton listened politely and said, "I did what needed doing. So did a lot of other men. Don't see why it needs written about." "Because it saved lives," Brennan said. "Then the lives are the story, not the nail." Henry Dalton refused to be interviewed. Brennan published his research without direct testimony, noting only that multiple sources indicate innovation originated with an enlisted sniper in the 36th Infantry Division, November 1944. Identity uncertain. The bent nail change appears in no official military manual. It won no medals. It created no patents or technical reports. It saved lives through the simple idea that sometimes the best answer to complicated problems is a piece of wire and a bent nail positioned where they eliminate thinking and enable action. Innovation in war rarely comes from headquarters. It comes from men who face problems immediately and personally, who watch friends die because regulations prevent obvious solutions, who decide that court-martial matters less than preventing the next death. The bent nail range reference shows this pattern. Unofficial, unauthorized, effective, and ultimately invisible to everyone except those who needed it. The change worked not because it was sophisticated but because it was simple. It didn't require new manufacturing or engineering studies or committee approval. It required a private first class with steel mill experience and enough dead friends to overcome his fear of punishment. It required other snipers willing to copy an unauthorized change because it kept Germans from killing Americans. It required officers willing to pretend they didn't notice because the numbers showed men surviving who would have died. This is how actual change happens in combat, not through official channels, not through proper procedure, but through enlisted men who see the problem clearly because they live with its consequences, who create solutions with whatever materials they can find, who share those solutions quietly because regulations say they're not allowed to fix what's broken, through officers who know when following regulations means watching men die for no good reason except that someone wrote a manual before. Understanding how reality worked. The bent nail worked at 510 yards. 4 scouts died. American positions stayed hidden. Artillery didn't fall that night. Men who would have died kept living because a private from Gary decided a finishing nail mattered more than regulations. That's the actual story. Not heroic, not glorious, just practical, just necessary, just effective. Raymond Henry Dalton is buried in Calumet Park Cemetery in Merrillville, Indiana. His headstone lists his name, his dates, and a small notation. SGT U.S. Army World War II. No mention of innovation, no mention of the nail.